The Highway Pact. Why this German shepherd refused to let go. If you slowed your replay of that dash cam video, you'd spot the exact frame where everything changes. A little girl dashing onto the asphalt, waving frantic arms. A skeletal dog standing guard behind her. A pickup skidding sideways to avoid them both. Rewind further, and you uncover the darker prelude. Mara, 8, abandoned after a family argument gone toxic. Shadow 9, an ex-police dog discarded when trauma got in the way of duty. Fast forward, and you'll witness jaws clamped on a kidnapper's pant leg, a courtroom where a child signs her new surname, and a firehouse cheering loud enough to shake its rafters. But none of it happens without that roadside minute. Stick with us to relive the moment instincts overrode terror, explore the scars both canine and human, and discover why a scarlet ribbon on a retired canine might be the bravest badge you'll ever see. The wind howled through the pine trees like a ghost, searching for something it had lost. Tall trunks loomed like silent sentinels, and their needles shivered under the weight of winter's breath. The highway, barely more than a ribbon of cracked asphalt, cut through the forest like an old scar. No streetlights, no signs of life, just shadows and cold. On the side of that forgotten road, huddled behind a low guardrail and half buried in a patch of brittle shrubs, was a child. She sat with her knees tucked tight to her chest, arms wrapped around herself in a trembling cocoon. Her t-shirt, too thin even for autumn, clung to her skin like paper. The fabric was stained with dirt, a few tiny tears near the hem. Her jeans were frayed at the knees, wet from kneeling in patches of melting snow. Her name was Mara, though she hadn't said it aloud in hours. Maybe longer. The world had gone strangely quiet since the car door slammed shut. "Wait here. I'll be back." That's what the voice had said. She'd heard those words before, said in different ways, but always with the same outcome. Someone leaving and never returning. Her lips were tinged blue now, and her teeth chattered despite the stillness of the air. The temperature had dropped sharply as the sun fell, and with each passing minute it became harder to stay awake. The stars above seemed cruel in their beauty, distant, unreachable, like the warmth she remembered from home, if she even had a home anymore. The forest around her creaked and murmured with life just out of sight. An owl hooted somewhere high in the trees. Its cry carried on the wind like a warning. Twigs snapped now and then, too heavy for squirrels, too slow for deer. Mara stiffened each time, her small body rigid with fear. She didn't cry loudly. She'd learned not to. Instead, her sobs came in stifled bursts, barely audible over the rustling needles above. Her shoulders shook, but her voice stayed trapped in her throat. A part of her still hoped that if she stayed quiet enough, maybe the monsters wouldn't find her. But the monsters had already come. They just hadn't looked like the ones from the bedtime books. A sudden gust of wind kicked up a flurry of dried leaves, sending them tumbling across the road in a swirling dance. Mara blinked against the sting of dust, and that's when she heard it. A soft rustle, closer than before. Not the skittering of small feet. This was heavier, measured, watching. She held her breath. Her fingers dug into the denim at her knees. Her ears strained to separate the sound from the wind, to isolate it from the natural groans of the forest. There it was again, a gentle crunch of pine needles. Mara's head turned slowly, her eyes wide with panic. Behind the brush low to the ground, half in shadow, something moved. A shape, not large but not small, lean, quiet, and still. For a moment, her brain refused to make sense of it. It wasn't a person. And it wasn't quite an animal she recognized. It crouched low, one paw a paw forward in the dirt. The moon slid from behind a cloud. A shaft of pale silver light spilled across the scene. That's when she saw them. Eyes, golden, watchful, not angry, but not soft either. A kind of tired sharpness. The creature stared at her in silence, its breath visible in short puffs. Mara's heart pounded in her chest, loud enough she was sure it echoed. Her mind raced. Is it a wolf? A coyote? She thought about running, but her legs wouldn't move. Then the figure took one cautious step forward, and the light revealed more. A dog, or something close. Its fur was dark and ragged, clumped with dirt and blood. Ribs jutted out beneath the skin, its left shoulder streaked with what looked like an old wound, now crusted over. Its ears were alert, but folded slightly back, not in aggression, but uncertainty. And there, barely visible beneath the tangled hair around its neck, was something unmistakable. A collar, worn, frayed, and nearly fused into the matting. Not wild, not free, not anymore. Mara felt her breath catch. Her fear didn't vanish, but it shifted, changed shape. The dog wasn't lunging, wasn't barking, just watching. Something in those eyes, those tired, battered eyes, looked like what she felt. Lost, alone, forgotten. For a long moment, neither of them moved. The wind swept between them, and the forest leaned in as if holding its breath. And then the girl, fragile as she was, slowly lifted a trembling hand, just a few inches. The motion made the dog flinch, but it didn't retreat. A minute passed, then another. Tentatively, as if expecting pain, the dog took a step forward, then another. Its belly was low to the ground, movements deliberate and cautious. When it came close enough, it paused again, sniffing. Then, with the gentlest touch, it pressed its nose to the girl's palm. Mara's fingers brushed across the cold, wet fur. The moment the contact happened, something inside her cracked open, and something else, fragile and flickering, stepped forward from the dark. Not hope, not yet, but the first shape of it. A sound escaped her lips, a gasp, followed by a breath that didn't shake. Her body relaxed just slightly. The dog's tail gave a faint wag, not much, but enough. And without a word, without anyone to witness, a pact was formed. They were both wounded, both abandoned. But in that silent forest beneath the whispering pines, they were no longer alone. The stillness after contact felt sacred, like the hush that follows a whispered prayer. Mara didn't move, barely breathed. The cold gnawed at her skin, but her hand remained outstretched, fingertips tingling from the touch. The creature had backed away just slightly, enough to study her again from a safer distance. It crouched in the underbrush, half-concealed, half-exposed muscles taut, as if preparing to bolt. The moon, now fully risen, threw silver across the landscape, painting the forest floor in long strokes of light and shadow. That's when Mara truly saw her. Not a wolf, not a coyote, not some wild predator. She was a dog, a German shepherd, or at least what remained of one. Her fur, once likely a proud black and tan coat, was now caked in dirt, snarled and patchy. The shape of her body told a story. Ribs like a washboard, hips too angular, a left hind leg that didn't quite bear weight. She stood uneven, shifting with hesitation. Her right shoulder was torn, a raw, puckered gash, still crusted with old blood, fur matted into a dark scab. And yet she didn't whimper. She didn't collapse. She held herself like a ghost that had forgotten how to die. There was something in her posture that didn't belong in the wild. Not entirely. Mara noticed it next. The glint of metal. A collar. It wasn't just old, it was nearly embedded into her neck. The fur around it had grown up and over the leather, and rust had eaten into the clasp. There was no tag, no name, just proof that once someone had claimed her. And somewhere along the way, they had let her go. Or worse, they had sent her into something she hadn't come back from. The dog's ears twitched, every tiny sound pulling her attention, an owl call, the snap of a branch in the wind. She was always listening, always scanning. It wasn't nervousness, it was survival. Mara's gaze dropped to the creature's legs. Her right front paw was pressed delicately to the ground, as if testing it. But the way she stood, it wasn't just hurt. It was disciplined, controlled. She moved like she had been trained, not a stray, not just abandoned. This was a dog who had once known command. And then something unexpected happened. The dog blinked slowly, not the sharp blink of fear, but the kind that animals use when they're trying to tell you they mean no harm. Her head tilted, just slightly. She took one step forward, then another, still cautious, but drawn to the child with some instinct even she didn't understand anymore. Mara felt her heart thud, loud, but not from fear, from something else. She looked into the dog's eyes, those gold-amber eyes, dulled but not extinguished. They held something she recognized in herself. Exhaustion, caution, and a small flicker of longing that had nothing to do with hunger. The dog stopped again, less than 3 feet away. Her muzzle was streaked with old scars, healed unevenly. There were bits of pine sap tangled in her fur, a burr clinging to her tail. She smelled of wild grass, rusted metal, and something sharp beneath it like smoke that had long since faded. But beneath all that, she smelled like memory. Mara reached out again, this time slower. No words, just breath and motion. Her fingers trembled as they hovered near the creature's muzzle. The dog didn't flinch. She leaned forward slightly, just enough to press her nose into the girl's palm again. The second contact was firmer, surer, and in that brief moment, Mara saw it. A flash of something old in the dog's gaze, training, purpose. She had once been someone's partner, a protector, but she had been cast out, somewhere along the line, hurt, forgotten, just like her. Mara didn't have the words for what she felt, but the ache in her chest told her it was real. She slid down slowly, sitting cross-legged now, her arms wrapped tightly around herself. The cold hadn't relented, but the fear had. The dog circled once, limping, then settled just a breath away. Not touching, not claiming, but near. Her head remained upright, ears still listening to the forest, but her body had relaxed, fractionally. Enough to suggest she wouldn't run. Not yet. Not from this child. Above them, the trees swayed with the wind, their needles whispering soft secrets to the sky. Mara lowered her head, cheek resting on her knees. Her eyes fluttered closed, and when they opened again, she whispered for the first time all night, so low it was almost a thought. "Who hurt you?" The dog didn't move, but the question hung in the air between them like smoke. Mara's throat burned with dryness, but she swallowed it back. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the only thing she still had, a lint-covered, half-melted candy. She unwrapped it carefully and placed it near the dog's front paw. The dog sniffed it, then looked at Mara. She didn't eat it, but she stayed. That was enough. And so beneath the towering pines and the hush of the forest, two broken beings, each abandoned in different ways, sat side by side in the dark, not yet healed, not yet whole, but together. The wind had settled now, quieting into soft exhalations between the trees. The forest, though still dark and untamed, no longer felt like it was pressing in on Mara. The air was still bitter, biting at her fingers and toes, but something had changed. She wasn't alone anymore. The dog, this wounded sentinel from the wild, lay close, but not too close, her body curled in that half-alert posture that creatures of instinct often held, never quite resting, never fully trusting. And yet she had stayed. That meant something. Mara shifted slightly on the frozen earth, dry needles crunching beneath her. Her hand hovered just above the dog's head, uncertain. Her breath trembled, visible in the pale light like wisps of courage trying to form shape. She wanted to touch her again, not like before, cautious, tentative, but real this time, like she meant it. But her arm wouldn't move. Fear still lingered like frost in her veins. What if the dog bit? What if it bolted? What if it really was too wild to stay? Then, as if sensing the storm in the child's chest, the dog lifted her head and looked up. Golden eyes met Mara's, no aggression, no command, just waiting. Mara whispered, more breath than sound. "Is it okay?" The dog blinked once, slow, deliberate. It was. With a courage born not from certainty but from desperation, Mara reached forward again. Her hand closed the final inch of distance and brushed against the coarse fur along the dog's cheek. Ember, though Mara did not yet know that name leaned ever so slightly into the contact. And then, gently, licked the tips of the child's fingers. It was not the sloppy, enthusiastic greeting of a happy dog. This was something else entirely. Softer, smaller, like a forgotten ritual, remembered only in muscle memory. Mara's throat tightened, and the tears that had dried on her cheeks began to return. Not from fear this time, but something far more dangerous. Hope. She lowered herself onto the cold ground beside the dog, her back pressing gently against the thick trunk of a pine tree. Its bark was rough, but it grounded her. The scent of sap and frozen earth mingled with the musky warmth of the animal beside her. She tucked her arms around herself for warmth, but left one hand resting near the dog's flank. A silent invitation. After a long pause, the dog inched closer, barely perceptible movements, careful and quiet. She settled down fully now, her side brushing against Mara's leg. The girl didn't flinch. She welcomed it. It was the first warmth she'd felt all night. Above them, the moon continued its slow arc across the sky, casting long silver shadows that danced between the trees. Every now and then, a breeze would ruffle the branches, sending a shower of pine needles drifting down like confetti from some invisible ceremony. The girl tilted her head up toward the stars. She wondered if her mother was looking at the same sky, if she even remembered where she'd left her, if she'd even wanted to come back. Mara tried not to ask those questions. They hurt too much. Instead, she focused on the steady, rhythmic breathing of the dog beside her, the rise and fall of her flank. the way her tail twitched now and then, more from instinct than intent. Without thinking, Mara whispered again, "Thank you." The dog didn't respond. She didn't have to. A few minutes passed, or maybe an hour. Time felt slow and syrupy, like the forest itself had suspended its rules just for them. Eventually, exhaustion crept back in. Mara's eyelids grew heavy, her shivers becoming weaker, spaced farther apart. She curled into herself, then slowly leaned into the dog's side. The contact made the animal tense at first, a flicker of old fear, of remembered pain. But when Mara didn't pull or squeeze, just rested there, small and still, the dog exhaled and let it be. Together, they formed a fragile silhouette in the moonlight. Girl and dog, child and protector. Each broken in ways the other didn't yet understand. Each holding the other like a question still waiting for its answer. A pine cone fell nearby with a sharp crack, startling them both. The dog raised her head, ears alert, eyes scanning. Mara instinctively reached for her fur, fingers brushing along her shoulder. "Shh. It's okay," the girl whispered, as if she were the one doing the comforting now. The dog slowly lay her head back down, her body settling once more. There were no sirens in the distance, no footsteps coming through the brush, no parent's voice calling a name. The world remained silent in its abandonment. But in that silence, something else bloomed. Not quite safety, not yet trust, but a pact. Not the kind made with words or promises, but one sealed in shared shivering, in shared silence, in the unspoken vow that they would not leave each other, not tonight. And under the hush of ancient trees, while frost kissed the edges of their breath, the pact held. One girl, one dog, two stories scarred by others' choices, now braided together in the dark. The silence between the girl and the dog was a fragile kind of peace woven together by breath, by cold, by proximity. The forest still whispered, still watched, but for now it allowed them that pocket of stillness beneath the pines. Then a low hum in the distance, faint at first, like a memory crawling back through the trees, then stronger, tires humming over cracked asphalt, headlights swelled in the darkness, sweeping through the gaps in the forest like searching eyes. Mara stirred. Her lashes fluttered as she blinked through the blur of cold. Her heart quickened, not out of fear this time, but out of something that felt like hope's last spark. The sound grew louder. A truck. She scrambled to her feet, nearly slipping on the frozen leaves, her legs stiff and clumsy from hours of stillness. Ember raised her head too, ears pricking forward, body alert but unmoving. As the headlights rounded a bend, Mara burst from behind the brush, her arms flailing above her head. "Please," she cried, her voice hoarse and cracking. "Please stop." The truck braked hard, tires skidding on loose gravel, crunching to a halt just past the girl. Dust rose around it, caught in the beams like smoke. Behind the wheel sat a man, 40s, maybe older Caleb Shore, volunteer firefighter, a man who had seen a dozen burned homes, flood rescues, and the aftermath of more car crashes than he cared to count. But nothing like this. He stared in disbelief at the figure in his headlights. A child, alone, barefoot, shirt too thin for a night like this. And behind her, a shape low to the ground, a dog, ribs showing, fur ragged, eyes burning in the glare like hot coals. Caleb leaned halfway out the window. "Hey, Are you okay? What the— Please! Mara shouted again, voice rising in panic. She's hurt! Don't leave us! Caleb shut off the engine and climbed out slowly, both hands raised in an instinctive gesture of peace. It's all right, he said gently. I'm not here to hurt you. Are you alone out here? Before she could answer, Ember stepped forward from the brush, her gait uneven but controlled. She stopped between Caleb and the girl, head lowered, her stance cautious. And then a low growl. It wasn't loud, wasn't savage, but it held weight. Caleb stopped in his tracks. He knew that sound not from a house pet, but from a dog that had seen too much, trusted too little. His eyes flicked down, and he saw the tension in the dog's legs, the rise of her shoulders, the split-second hesitation. She wasn't attacking. She was protecting. Mara, without looking, reached a hand behind her and touched the dog's side. Ember went still, the growl fading into breath. "She's not mean," the girl said, her voice barely above a whisper. She thought you might hurt me." Caleb nodded slowly. "That's fair." He took one cautious step closer. "What's your name?" "Mara." "Okay, Mara. I'm Caleb. I'm a firefighter. I don't live far from here." He knelt slightly to appear smaller. "Are you hurt?" She shook her head. "I'm cold. She's hurt." He glanced at the dog again, the blood-crusted shoulder, the way she favored one leg. He couldn't see the collar clearly, but something told him she hadn't been wild forever. "All right," he said. "Let's get you somewhere warm. Both of you." Mara hesitated. "Can she come too?" "Absolutely." With trembling fingers, Mara gestured toward the truck. Ember didn't move. Her eyes followed Caleb, wary and locked. "I won't touch her," he promised. "Not unless she lets me." Only when Mara began to walk slowly, softly toward the truck did Ember follow. She stayed close, her nose brushing the girl's hand now and then like a tether. Caleb opened the passenger door. He reached into the back seat and pulled out a thick flannel blanket, holding it out. Mara took it wordlessly and wrapped herself tight. The dog paused at the truck's threshold. She sniffed the steps, backed away, then tried again. Her front paws made it up, but her back legs trembled. Caleb stepped forward slightly. "May I help?" Ember growled again, low and soft. "Okay. No touch. Got it." Mara turned, eyes wide. "She's just scared." Caleb knelt, stayed still. "So am I sometimes," he said quietly. After a tense moment, Ember jumped, clumsily but determined, and landed on the truck floor with a grunt. She curled immediately at Mara's feet, her body pressed into the floorboard. Caleb shut the door, circled back, and climbed in. He took a moment before turning the key. He looked at the rearview mirror. Mara's face was barely visible under the blanket. Her lips trembled, but her eyes, those were sharp. Watching, measuring. Trust didn't come easy. Not for either of them. "She your dog?" he asked gently. Mara looked down. "She found me." Caleb nodded and put the truck into gear. "Well," he murmured, more to himself than to her, "looks like the right ones always do." And as they pulled away from the dark stretch of road, the forest faded behind them, swallowed again by the shadows, leaving behind only a faint print in the frost where two lost souls had once waited together. The hum of the engine was soft, almost apologetic, as the old pickup rumbled down the cracked mountain road. Inside the cab, the heater sputtered to life, filling the space with a low whine and a faint scent of engine grease and pine-scented air freshener. Caleb flicked his eyes toward the rearview mirror, then quickly back to the road. Mara sat stiffly in the passenger seat, the oversized flannel blanket wrapped so tightly around her that only her face peeked out. Her cheeks were raw from wind, streaked with salt and dirt. Her lips were still pale, and her eyes, God, those eyes were far too hollow for a child. Down at her feet, nestled in the shadows of the floorboard, Ember trembled. Her body was curled so tightly it looked like she was trying to disappear. She refused to make eye contact. Each time the truck hit a bump or changed speed, she flinched, tail tucked, ears flattened back. Caleb kept both hands on the wheel, his posture calm, voice steady. Years of emergency calls had taught him that when people or animals were falling apart, you had to anchor yourself first. "She's okay down there?" he asked gently. Mara nodded without looking up. "She just doesn't like cars." Caleb didn't push. They drove for a few minutes in silence, the headlights carving their way through the trees. The girl stared straight ahead, unmoving. But then, without warning, her voice broke through the stillness, small and cracked. "She told me to wait there." Caleb glanced over, but didn't interrupt. "She was yelling on the phone, with someone. Then she said to get in the car." Her fingers clutched the blanket tighter. "We drove really fast. I asked where we were going, but she didn't answer. She pulled over and said, 'I'll be back. Just stay here, okay?'" Her voice faltered, but she kept going. "That was yesterday, I think." Caleb felt something in his chest twist. "No jacket?" he asked softly. She shook her head. "It was in the back seat, but she left too fast and the door locked. I couldn't get it." No food, no flashlight, no name tag, just left behind like a thoughtless errand. "She'll come back," Mara added quickly, as if reciting a line from memory. She got busy, probably." Caleb didn't respond right away. He didn't say, "maybe," or "we'll see," or any other soft lie meant to keep kids afloat. He knew too much to offer easy reassurances. Instead, he said what he knew to be true. "Well, I'm really glad I found you when I did." Mara glanced at him for the first time. Just a flicker. Her expression unreadable. Caleb gestured gently toward Ember, who was still shaking beneath her. "And her too. She's hurting. But she followed you. Protected you. That says a lot." Mara looked down. "She didn't have to." "No," Caleb agreed. "But she did." Silence stretched again. Outside the windows, the trees gave way to the first signs of town-dim porch lights glowing in the distance. A diner sign flickering in and out, the curve of a quiet intersection. Caleb reached into the glove box and pulled out a small packet of crackers, the kind he kept in case of long shifts. He offered it, wordlessly. Mara hesitated, then took it with both hands, carefully tearing it open. Ember shifted slightly at the sound of crinkling plastic, but didn't lift her head. "Do you know her name?" Caleb asked. Mara shook her head. "She doesn't have one. I just call her Girl." "That's a start." She broke off half a cracker and gently held it out beneath the seat. Ember sniffed it, hesitated, then took it with trembling jaws. The girl's face softened for a moment. A crack in the shell. "She let me hold her last night," she whispered. "I think she was cold, too." Caleb's hands tightened slightly on the wheel. There was something unbearably pure about that image, two creatures, each tossed aside by the world, finding warmth in one another without a word exchanged. "She must have known," he said. "You needed each other." The truck turned onto a quieter road now, lined with small cabins and aging trailers. In the distance, the lights of the town hospital glowed soft yellow, like a lighthouse for the broken. "We're almost there," Caleb said. "They'll get you checked out. Nothing scary, I promise. And right next door, there's a vet clinic. I'll make sure she's looked after, too." Mara didn't reply, but her eyes followed the buildings as they approached. As Caleb slowed to pull into the parking lot, he noticed it again, that look, the same one in both sets of eyes. Not just fear, but history. The kind you don't talk about. The kind that gets carved into your bones when you're too young to understand it. And for a moment, Caleb felt a quiet fury stir inside him, not at Mara's mother, or whoever had hurt the dog, but at the way the world sometimes let it happen. How easy it was to discard what should have been protected. He parked near the emergency entrance, turned off the engine, let the silence settle again. Then he turned to Mara, his voice soft. "You ready?" She didn't move, but after a beat she nodded, and down by her feet, Ember, still trembling, lifted her head for the first time since they'd left the woods. The sliding doors of the emergency wing hissed open with a mechanical sigh, spilling white fluorescent light across the parking lot. For a split second, Mara squinted, her eyes not yet ready for the brightness after so many hours swallowed by the dark. Ember let out a low whine, barely audible, shrinking deeper into the blanket Caleb had wrapped her in. Inside, the hospital smelled like antiseptic and old linoleum. The reception desk was manned by a lone nurse with tired eyes and a thermos of coffee. She looked up, startled at first to see a man in a fire department hoodie carrying a bundled child and accompanied by what looked like a half-dead stray. "I need help," Caleb said plainly. "She's been outside in the cold all night, no jacket, no adult, and the dog—" He paused, eyes flicking down to Ember. "She's been through something. A vet's on site, right?" The nurse was already on her feet, calling for a pediatric nurse over the intercom. Mara clung tighter to Caleb's side, her fingers digging into the soft flannel. Her face was pale, lips chapped, but she said nothing. Ember shuffled beside her, limping heavily, each step a wince. Caleb knelt beside the girl. "They're gonna help, okay? I'll be right here, right outside the door." Mara hesitated, then slowly let go of his hoodie, turning to follow the nurse. She looked back once. Caleb gave her a nod, steady, grounded. Then it was Ember's turn. Across the parking lot, a side door creaked open under the vet clinic's small porch light. A woman in her late 40s stepped out, zipping up a navy vest embroidered with "Dr. Ridge After-Hours Emergency." Her hair was graying at the temples, face calm and weathered. "She's the one?" Dr. Ridge asked, walking toward them. Her gaze swept over Ember. "Oh, sweetheart. She's got a bad shoulder wound. Might be infected, but she's gentle. Scared, but not aggressive," Caleb said. Dr. Ridge crouched down, letting Ember see her hands. "Hey there, Mama. We're going to help you. No one's going to hurt you now." But Ember didn't move. She just stood frozen, breathing hard, eyes darting between Caleb and the vet, like she couldn't decide which threat was worse. "It's okay," Caleb said softly. He dropped to one knee beside her, hand resting near but not on her paw. "You trust the girl, right? I'm just trying to do what she'd want. Let us help." Something flickered behind Ember's eyes. Then, slowly, painfully, she stepped forward, one halting limp at a time, and let the vet guide her through the side door. Caleb stood there a moment longer, staring after them, until the door shut and swallowed the dog into silence. He exhaled. Only then did he feel the weight of everything pressing against his chest. Inside, the pediatric team had Mara under blankets in a small exam room. She sat on the bed, knees drawn up, sipping warm juice from a paper cup. A nurse was checking her vitals, speaking gently. "She's hypothermic but stable," the nurse told him. "We're giving her fluids and checking for other concerns. No bruising, no fractures. But," she hesitated, glancing back at the girl, "she's not saying much." "She will," Caleb said. "Just give her time." The nurse nodded and left them alone. Caleb stepped inside the doorway, leaning against the frame. Mara looked up. Their eyes met, and for a moment she wasn't the abandoned child, and he wasn't the rescuer. They were just two people, two hearts in the middle of a world that had let too much fall apart. "She's with the vet," he said quietly. "They're cleaning her up now. I'll let you know when I hear anything." Mara nodded once, then softly, "She hates needles." "Don't we all?" Caleb replied with a small smile. He sat in the plastic chair beside the bed, arms resting on his knees. He didn't speak further, just kept her company. The silence was not awkward. It was allowed, respected. After what felt like an hour, Dr. Ridge pushed open the hospital's connecting door, scrubs smudged, surgical gloves tucked into her waistband. Her face was lined with exhaustion, but her eyes were gentle. "She's sedated for now," she said. "The gash on her shoulder needed cleaning and stitching. Looks like an old bite, maybe a deep laceration from debris or metal. She's malnourished. Tick infestation. Multiple untreated scars. And old fractures, possibly from trauma." Mara stiffened on the bed. Dr. Ridge continued. "But she'll survive. With rest, food, and time, she'll be okay." Caleb stood. "I'll pay for whatever she needs." The vet raised an eyebrow. "It won't be cheap." He didn't hesitate. "Doesn't matter." Mara's voice, barely a whisper, cut through the air. "Can I see her?" Dr. Ridge looked between them. "Soon. She'll need rest tonight. But I'll let you sit with her for a minute before we move her to recovery. 1 minute." Minutes later, Mara stood by the clinic exam room, Caleb at her side. Ember lay on a padded blanket, still groggy, the stitches along her shoulder clean and fresh. One paw twitched now and then as if she were chasing something in a dream. Mara crouched down, touched the dog's side gently. "I'm still here," she whispered. "You waited for me. I'll wait for you, too." Caleb stood in the doorway, eyes glinting with something he hadn't felt in a long time. Not just sorrow, not just anger at the world. Something quieter, something like awe. He'd walked into burning buildings, pulled bodies from wreckage, faced sirens and smoke, but he had never seen this kind of quiet desperation before, the kind that whispered instead of screamed, that clung instead of collapsed, that healed, not with medicine, but with presence. The soft electronic hum of the scanner echoed faintly in the quiet exam room. Caleb leaned against the wall, arms crossed, eyes fixed on the form curled beneath the blanket on the padded table. Ember, though sedated still, gave the impression of coiled instinct, like a storm sleeping beneath her fur. Her chest rose and fell in shallow rhythm, one ear twitching at a phantom sound only she could hear. Dr. Ridge carefully parted the matted fur on the back of her neck and pressed the microchip scanner against her skin. A small beep broke the silence. "Got it," she murmured. Caleb stepped forward. "Anything?" She squinted at the handheld device, her thumb scrolling down the tiny digital screen. Then her face stilled. "Shadow 9, she read aloud. "Registered under Oakhurst Police Department, decommissioned K-9 unit. Status, retired. No recent handler, no current address, no owner contact. Caleb frowned. Shadow 9? That's her original designation, Ridge explained, the words slow, like she was still processing. She wasn't a stray. She was a working dog. Police issue. Caleb looked down at Ember No, Shadow 9, and something in his chest shifted. There'd been a weight in the way she moved, a quiet alertness in her eyes even when wounded. She hadn't behaved like a lost house pet. She had assessed, reacted, protected, and she had waited. "How does a K-9 officer end up abandoned in the woods, torn up like that?" he asked, more to himself than anyone else. Ridge moved back to the screen, her brows furrowed. "Her file is partially locked. There's limited access. But there's a note here. Decommissioned due to psychological trauma following an unspecified incident." Caleb's jaw tightened. "Meaning?" "Meaning," Ridge said quietly. "She saw something, or went through something, and they shelved her." "She was discarded," he muttered, "like a broken tool." Ridge nodded grimly. "And that's not all." She pulled up Ember's medical record, such as it was, overlaying it with the scans they'd taken earlier that night. "Here," she pointed. "See this? Old fracture in the rib cage, not treated properly. And here, scarring around the femur, like someone tried to splint it in the field but never followed up. There's also blunt force trauma on the right shoulder, inconsistent with training injuries." Caleb's voice was quiet now. "You're saying someone hurt her?" "Likely more than once," Ridge said. "This wasn't just an accident in the line of duty. These are signs of neglect, maybe abuse. She didn't just run, she survived." The words hung in the air like smoke. Caleb looked back at the dog, this silent survivor who had laid her body between a frightened child and the dark, who had limped forward through pain, through brush and ice, just to stay near. Not a stray, not lost, left behind. He could see now why Ember had flinched when the leash was offered, why her eyes, watchful and ancient, had flicked toward escape routes every time someone entered a room. She wasn't just guarding Mara, she was relearning trust one breath at a time. "Shadow 9, he repeated softly. "That's not who she is anymore." "No," Ridge agreed. "She's something else now." There was a long pause. "Do you know anyone at the department still?" she asked. Caleb's fingers flexed at his sides. "A few. Most of them rotated out or retired after the station overhaul, but yeah, I know who to call." "She deserves someone to ask the hard questions," Ridge said. "How she got out, who signed her off, why there's no handler on record. It doesn't feel right." "No," Caleb agreed. "None of this does." He walked out into the hallway, pulled out his phone and stared at it for a beat. Then he dialed. A gruff voice answered on the third ring. "Jim?" Caleb said. "It's Shore. You still have access to the department archives?" "Depends. What are we fishing for? A dog? Shadow 9? I think someone threw her away." There was a pause. The voice on the other end lowered. "You found her?" "She found me," Caleb replied. "And a little girl, both half frozen in the woods." "Jesus." "Yeah." "All right," Jim said. "Let me dig. I'll call you back. But Caleb, be careful. Some things don't get buried easy." "I'm counting on that." Back inside the exam room, Ridge was gently washing the area near Ember's paw, careful not to startle her despite the sedation. She glanced up as Caleb returned. "You made the call?" she asked. He nodded. "You think they'll care?" she added. "No," he said. "But I do." There was another quiet moment before Ridge spoke again. "She may not know where she belongs anymore." "She does now," Caleb said, almost without thinking. Ridge studied him. Then she nodded. "I'll move her to the recovery room. You'll be here?" Caleb glanced toward the hallway where Mara had fallen asleep in a borrowed cot, one arm dangling over the side as if still reaching for someone. "I'm not going anywhere," he said. As Ridge gently lifted Ember into her arms, the dog stirred just slightly, her head turning toward the door, toward the place where Mara had gone. And though no sound left her throat, there was a flicker of something ancient and loyal in her eyes. She remembered. The overhead fluorescence flickered faintly as the door clicked shut behind the social worker. Her name was Lee Danner, and she carried the scent of old coffee and colder truths. A manila folder rested in her hands, creased at the corners, its contents bristling with notes, incident reports, court dates no one showed up to. She moved with the weariness of someone who'd read too many of these. Caleb stood beside the cot where Mara lay, her small body still curled inward like she was trying to disappear inside herself. She hadn't spoken since the hospital staff had cleaned the dirt from her skin, combed the knots from her hair, or even when the IV needle had pricked her arm. Only when Ember, bandaged and groggy, was wheeled in to lie beside her, had the child's hand twitched and reached for fur. Now that same hand gripped a corner of Ember's blanket. "She won't talk," Caleb said softly. Lee nodded, kneeling beside the cot, setting the folder on her lap. "They rarely do. Not at first, especially not the ones who've had to survive without help for too long." She glanced at the sleeping dog curled at Mara's feet. "The dog is a grounding point. She's the only safe thing in the room." "She's more than that," Caleb said. "I believe you." Lee opened the file with quiet fingers. Inside were photographs, too many of them, and documents filled with bureaucratic language masking neglect. She turned one page and began reading aloud, softly. Mara Linden, age 6. Previous residence, Pinehurst trailer lot. Mother, Catherine Linden. No father listed. Current guardian status, none. She paused. "This is the 4th CPS call in 18 months, Lee said. The last one was just before winter set in. Neighbors heard screaming, glass breaking. Police were dispatched, no charges filed. The mother wouldn't press. The partner, Reed Norrell, walked." Caleb felt something coil in his gut. Why wasn't the child removed? "She refused to speak," Lee replied. "Same as now. And there were no visible marks that night. They didn't have grounds for removal, just warning notes and a court order that never got enforced." "She was left there?" "She was invisible," Lee said quietly. "Like too many others." She turned another page. School records show long absences. One teacher filed a concern about Mara falling asleep in class, showing signs of food insecurity. Again, no follow-up. And now? Now? Lee shut the file gently. She was found wandering alone in sub-zero temperatures. No coat, no shoes. The mother is missing. Reed Norrell hasn't been seen in 2 weeks. That's abandonment, full stop. Caleb swallowed hard, glancing down at the child. Mara stirred slightly, her cheek pressing deeper into Ember's flank. The dog didn't move, but her eye cracked open just enough to check the room, check the girl, then settle again. "She won't speak to anyone," Lee said. "But when that dog's in the room, her breathing slows. Her muscles relax. I've seen trauma cases before, but this—" Caleb looked up. "They've been through something together." Yes, Lee said, voice tightening. And I need to understand what. He hesitated, then crouched near the cot, speaking low, almost like whispering to a wounded animal. Mara, he said gently, it's okay if you can't talk. We're not here to scare you. But we need to know if anyone hurt you. We need to know if you remember where your mom went. Anything you tell us might help keep you safe. The little girl didn't stir, but Ember lifted her head. She looked directly at Caleb, then nudged her nose gently toward Mara's hand. Mara's fingers twitched. Then, slowly, they moved just enough to tangle deeper into the dog's fur. She doesn't trust words, Caleb murmured, but she understands silence. Lee sighed and rubbed the corner of her eye. If she stays nonverbal, we'll need to assign a trauma specialist. Someone trained in selective mutism, maybe therapy dogs. But if Ember's not registered as a service animal, she stays, Caleb said, sharper than he meant. That dog saved her life. She's the reason Mara made it out of those woods. If there's any chance of healing, it starts with her. Lee studied him. And what about you, Caleb? Why are you here? He hesitated. Because someone has to be. That someone usually isn't a firefighter volunteering to sit bedside for hours. I've pulled people out of fires before, he said quietly. Most of them scream, some cry. But there's a very few, who say nothing. Just look at you like they expected to die and now they're unsure if surviving was worse. His eyes fell back to Mara. That's the look she gave me. Lee was quiet for a moment. Then, I can file an emergency placement if no relatives come forward, temporarily. With Ember, too, if the vet signs off. I'll take them both, Caleb said before she could finish. Lee blinked. That's a serious responsibility. I know. You don't even know their full story. I don't need to. The social worker looked at him for a long time, as if trying to decide whether this man, with tired eyes and smoke-scarred hands, really understood what he was stepping into. Then Mara moved. Her hand, slow and uncertain, reached out, not toward Ember this time, but toward Caleb. It stopped inches from his wrist. He didn't speak. He just let her fingers rest there, light as breath. And in that moment a bond began to form, not of rescue, but recognition. Two survivors, one silent pact. The low hum of the clinic's hallway lights buzzed overhead as Caleb sat on the edge of the vinyl chair, elbows on knees, hands clasped like he was holding something fragile between them. Across the glass panel, Ember lay sedated but breathing steadily. Her flank was wrapped in fresh gauze. A line of sutures curved along her ribs like a broken seam finely stitched. The thick fur around her neck had been trimmed away to clean the wounds beneath, some old, some fresh. Scars told the story of places she couldn't describe with words. She didn't need to. Dr. Ridge stood beside Caleb, arms folded across his white coat, expression unreadable. She made it through the night, the vet said finally, his voice quiet but firm. That alone tells me she's got more fight in her than most. Caleb nodded, watching the slight rise and fall of Ember's chest. You think she'll walk again? With time, rest, physical therapy. But, Ridge hesitated, then pulled a chart from under his arm. There's trauma here that isn't just physical. When we tried to examine her without the girl nearby, she panicked, froze, snapped at the tech. But the moment Mara stepped in, just stood in the doorway. Ember calmed, laid her head back down like nothing had happened. Caleb looked at him. You're saying she's bonded? I'm saying she's tethered, emotionally, deeply. And I've seen that before, with war dogs, canine retirees, animals that survive trauma by latching onto one thread of safety and refusing to let go. He tapped the chart. And for Ember, that thread is Mara. Caleb exhaled slowly, then stood. What happens now? Animal control should have already been called, Ridge said. But I stalled. Figured if this dog is a former K9, and if she's that connected to the child, it might complicate things. And frankly, I didn't want her thrown in a kennel to wait out paperwork. Neither do I. Caleb turned to face him fully. Look, I want to cover her treatment, whatever it costs. And if she needs placement, foster, long-term care, anything, I'll do it. She's not a stray, not really. You saw that scar on her ear? That's not from a fight in the woods, it's a tag burn from tactical use. Someone used her and dumped her. Ridge narrowed his eyes. You're familiar with those cases? I've pulled dogs like her from fire zones, from basements, even one from the wreck of a training facility after the roof collapsed. Same look in the eyes, like they're waiting for someone to give them a reason to breathe again. The vet was quiet a moment. You're sure about this? Yes, but I'm not doing it alone. I want to be updated on Mara's case. I want to make sure she's okay, because if Ember's healing is tied to that girl, I'm not separating them. You know the state won't make that easy. I don't expect easy. Dr. Ridge looked back through the glass at the dog. She won't eat unless Mara's nearby. She didn't take water until the girl whispered something in her ear. We couldn't even get a muzzle on her, but Mara touched her cheek and said, "It's okay now." Caleb felt something shift inside his chest, a dull ache he hadn't recognized in years. She's just a kid, Caleb said quietly. But that bond, it's the kind of thing people spend a lifetime looking for. You think I'm going to let a system break it because of red tape? Ridge sighed. You're talking like someone who's already made up his mind. I have. He stepped toward the door to the observation room. Let me go in. Let her know someone's staying. Ridge opened the door without a word. Inside, the air smelled of antiseptic and warm fur. Ember stirred slightly as Caleb entered, her eyes fluttering half open. No growl, no tension, just quiet. Caleb knelt beside her, brushing his hand gently along the clean fur near her ears. You've been through hell, girl, he whispered, but you're not alone in it anymore. The dog's tail thumped weakly once against the padded bed. He smiled. A moment later, a soft knock came behind him. Lee Danner stepped in, holding a tablet. Sorry, she said, voice low. Didn't mean to interrupt. Caleb stood. Is it Mara? She's awake. She asked where Ember is. She asked? Lee nodded. It was barely a whisper, but she's asking now. That's progress. Caleb looked down at Ember, then back at Lee. Can she visit? I was coming to ask the same thing. Together they returned to Mara's room. The little girl sat up on the cot, blanket around her shoulders. Her eyes were no longer hollow, but searching, scanning behind Lee's legs. When Ember limped in, guided gently by Caleb on a leash barely needed, Mara's breath caught. She slid off the cot and met the dog halfway. They sat there, forehead to forehead, no words, just breath. Dr. Ridge leaned against the doorway, watching the scene unfold. You were right, he said softly to Caleb. They're not just healing. They're holding each other together. Caleb didn't respond. He was watching them, too, with the quiet understanding of someone who had once needed saving and had found it in the least expected place. The waiting room at Haven Ridge Animal Clinic was quiet that morning. softened by the hush of snowfall against the windows and the slow murmur of classical music from a dusty radio on the counter. A faint scent of antiseptic clung to the air, mingling with pine cleaner and the faint musk of fur. But in the farthest corner of the room, beyond the chairs, beyond the plexiglass divider and the front desk, Caleb sat waiting, eyes trained on the glass door. Then he saw her. Mara stepped out of the back seat of a silver sedan, the kind CPS often used. The social worker, Ms. Danner again, opened the door and offered her a hand, but Mara didn't take it. Instead, she climbed out on her own, clutching something tight to her chest. A stuffed bear, once white, now the color of old snow and years of clinging. Her coat hung awkwardly over thin shoulders, borrowed, likely donated. Her boots didn't match. But her eyes, those wide, dark eyes, searched through the glass before she even stepped inside. She wasn't looking for people. She was looking for Ember. Caleb stood as they entered. The little bell above the door chimed. Mara paused for a moment at the threshold, as if remembering the last time she had seen this place. Her fingers clenched tighter around the bear. The social worker gave a nod to Caleb, then stepped aside. "You ready to see her?" Caleb asked gently, his voice low, like speaking too loudly might fracture something delicate. Mara nodded once. They walked together down the hallway, Mara half a step behind, silent but steady. When they reached the recovery room, Caleb tapped lightly on the glass. Dr. Ridge opened the door from inside. Ember was lying on her mat, head down between her paws. But the moment Mara's figure slipped into the doorway, something in her body shifted. Her ears perked, her nose twitched. Then, almost too fast for the eye to catch, she struggled to her feet with a low, soft whine. "Mara," Ridge said quietly, stepping back. "Let's see how she does." The child stepped forward, silent. Ember took 2 slow steps, her body still tender from sutures and strained muscle, but her tail began to sway, a cautious, hopeful rhythm. And then they met, just as before, forehead to muzzle. No one spoke. They didn't need to. Caleb turned his face slightly, blinking hard. Mara knelt beside Ember, gently placing the worn stuffed bear between them. Ember sniffed it, gave it a soft nudge, then laid her chin across Mara's lap like she'd been waiting for this exact wait, this exact moment, to breathe again. For minutes, they sat like that. Ridge stepped away, leaving the room. Caleb stayed back, leaning against the doorframe, arms crossed not from distance, but reverence. "They said she hasn't spoken since the hospital," Ms. Danner whispered behind him. "Not a word since Ember was taken in for surgery." "She doesn't need words," Caleb replied, eyes still on them. "Not when she's with her." "I don't think the department's seen anything like this," the social worker added. "But they approved a weekly visit schedule, therapeutic grounds. It's not standard." "But neither are they." Caleb nodded. "Good." He watched as Mara lifted Ember's paw gently, tracing the pads with her thumb. Ember's eyes fluttered half-closed in trust. It wasn't play. It was memory touch, anchored in safety. A ritual no one taught them, but they somehow remembered together. "She begged," Ms. Danner said softly, "every night since she was placed with her foster family. Didn't cry. Didn't act out. Just asked over and over, 'Can I see Ember yet?'" Caleb felt the weight of that sentence settle deep in his chest. He had fought fires. He had carried broken bodies from rubble. But nothing compared to watching this kind of quiet devotion, the way a child and a wounded dog had chosen each other, again and again, in the stillness. He stepped into the room. Mara looked up. He crouched beside them and held out his hand, not toward Mara, but toward Ember, who sniffed it with familiarity, then nudged it with her nose. "She's stronger," Caleb said gently, "and I think you helped with that." Mara didn't answer, but she leaned her head against Ember's shoulder, pulling the stuffed bear into her arms again. "We're going to keep letting you visit," he said, "and maybe if the people in charge are smart enough, they'll see what we all already know." Mara tilted her head just slightly, curiosity flickering in her eyes. "That you and Ember," Caleb said, voice soft, "aren't just a story in some file. You're each other's family." Outside, snow continued to fall in slow, silent drifts. Inside, a little girl and a broken dog curled into the kind of peace the world rarely grants, but when it does, it arrives without fanfare. Just warmth and breath, and the kind of bond that never asks for permission. The wind had softened in Havenridge. The worst of winter had passed, though the mornings still held their bite. But in the quiet hours just after sunrise, when the frost clung to the porch railing and breath came in small, visible clouds, there was a rhythm returning to the world, slow, steady, and achingly tender. Mara came every Wednesday and Sunday. Each time, Caleb would meet her at the gate, offering a gloved hand she rarely took but never shrank from. She'd nod, just once, then make her way across the small yard, boots crunching over gravel, the stuffed bear still clutched tight beneath one arm like a piece of herself she couldn't yet let go. Ember would already be waiting. She stood just inside the enclosure Caleb had built beside the house, her coat growing thicker again, her weight slowly returning. The limp was still there, but softer now, more like memory than pain. And when she saw Mara, the change in her was undeniable. Her tail would twitch once, then again, then it would wag in slow, deliberate circles, no longer cautious but joyful, measured joy. Mara would kneel without a word. Ember would step forward, pushing her nose into the child's coat as if inhaling home. And then the ritual would begin. A soft brush in Mara's hand bristles, worn, handle cracked. She worked in silence, tugging gently through the tufts of tangled fur around Ember's neck, careful near the healing scar that curved along her flank. Ember would close her eyes, body relaxing under the touch like it was the only kind she trusted. Then Mara would check the water pouring fresh from a thermos Caleb had started filling for her on cold mornings. Sometimes she'd crouch and whisper things into Ember's ear, things no one else could hear. Feeding came last, bits of boiled chicken or soft kibble in her small palm, extended with fingers still a little hesitant, but never trembling. Ember took them delicately, as if understanding how much this mattered. And always Caleb would watch, sometimes from the porch, coffee cooling in his hand, other times leaning against the fence, tools in his back pocket long forgotten. At first he watched out of concern for safety, for trauma, for protocol. But now he watched because he couldn't help it. They made him feel something he hadn't let himself in years. A girl with eyes too old for her age. A dog with wounds the world couldn't see. And somehow, together, they made each other less broken. Caleb had seen men pull survivors from fire-ravaged buildings. He'd carried children out of floods. But nothing gripped him like the way Mara leaned her cheek into Ember's shoulder now, or how Ember instinctively shifted her weight to hold her steadier. It wasn't grand. It wasn't loud. But it was healing, unmistakable, and alive. One afternoon, Mara looked up from brushing and glanced toward the porch. She didn't wave, but her eyes met Caleb's, just for a second. He gave a nod, slow and sure. She turned back to Ember, but something settled in his chest. He wasn't just watching them anymore. He was rooting for them. And slowly, without realizing, he was beginning to belong to them too. The rain had come without warning. Not a storm, but the kind of rain that lingered, thin needles of water falling from a bruised sky, soaking everything in a quiet, relentless wash. The porch light flickered as droplets hissed against the bulb, and somewhere in the distance wind chimes sang their sorrow in broken rhythms. Caleb was just rinsing his coffee mug when he saw the small figure dart across the yard. At first he thought it was a stray, maybe a fox or one of the neighbor's dogs, but then the silhouette stumbled, paused, and swayed, the way a child would. He stepped out onto the porch, boots splashing against the wet wood. "Hello?" he called into the night, voice tense. "Is someone out there?" No answer, just the tapping of rain on metal and wood. And then, barely audible, came a muffled sound, a sob. Caleb jogged toward the enclosure, heart suddenly tightening. There, curled against Ember's side like a fallen branch against a tree trunk, was Mara. Her arms were wrapped around the dog's neck, face buried into thick fur, soaked to the bone. Ember didn't move, except for the soft rumble in her chest, neither growl nor purr, but something ancient and protective. Caleb stopped short. "Mara?" His voice cracked from something deeper than surprise. "What are you doing out here?" She didn't look up right away. Her shoulders trembled. Rainwater streamed down her cheeks, but it wasn't just the storm. "They said I can't see her anymore." The words broke out of her like glass under pressure. "They said you're not part of the plan." He crouched beside the fence, trying to catch her eyes. "Who said that?" "My foster mom. She said it's too much, that I'm too attached." Mara wiped at her nose with a drenched sleeve. "She doesn't get it. Ember's not just a dog." Caleb opened the gate slowly, stepping in like he was entering holy ground. Ember watched him, unmoving, but not hostile. "I believe you," he said softly. Mara curled tighter into Ember's side. "They think I'm doing better, that I don't need her now. But they're wrong. I can't sleep without remembering the sound of the trees at night, the empty house. I can't breathe when she's not close." She looked up at him then, eyes bloodshot and raw. She's the only one who knows what it felt like. The rain didn't let up. It clung to their skin, to the silence. Caleb knelt beside them both, his shirt darkened and heavy. "Let's get you inside," he said. "We'll dry off, figure this out." "No," she whispered. "They'll take her away." "They won't. Not tonight." She hesitated, then nodded once. Caleb gently unwrapped her from Ember's side and scooped her into his arms. She didn't fight him, just leaned against his chest like something that had finally run out of strength. Ember followed, slow but close, her limp barely noticeable in the softness of mud. Inside, the fire was still glowing low. Caleb wrapped Mara in a towel, placed another by the hearth for Ember. For a moment, they sat there, all three dripping and shivering in silence. Caleb looked at the girl, at the dog, and something settled in him, like roots finally reaching water. These two weren't broken attachments. They were a bond, and no plan on paper could understand that. The storm had eased by the time they stepped through the door, but the cold still clung to their clothes like ghosts, unwilling to leave. Caleb pushed it shut behind them, gently turning the deadbolt knot out of fear, but to draw a line between the night and whatever warmth remained inside. The old cabin groaned as the heater kicked in. Rain tapped at the windows like a memory trying to come back. Mara stood there in the foyer, arms folded, dripping onto the worn wood floor. Her stuffed bear hung limply from one hand, its cotton fur soaked and sagging, its stitched eye nearly undone. Ember pressed her body close behind the girl like a second shadow, silent but ever present. "Let's get you dry," Caleb said softly. He didn't ask questions. Not yet. Just moved with quiet purpose, grabbing one of his flannel shirts from the back of a chair, an old towel from the laundry basket, a pair of thick socks that once belonged to his niece when she visited for Christmas 2 years ago. He knelt beside Mara and began gently toweling off her soaked hair, hands working carefully as if she might shatter. She didn't speak, not at first. Only after her hair was mostly dry, and she was curled up on the couch with a blanket over her knees and a steaming mug of cocoa nestled between her fingers, did she finally look at him. Her voice was small, so small he almost missed it. "Why do they keep moving me around?" Caleb froze for a beat. The question hit him harder than he expected. "I mean," she continued, eyes on the swirling cocoa, "I'm not bad. I don't scream. I do what they say. But they still pack me up, every time, like I'm someone else's mess." She didn't cry. She didn't need to. Her voice carried all the grief in the world. Caleb sat down across from her, elbows on his knees. He could feel the lump forming in his throat. Something old and heavy, something he'd buried under years of soot and silence. He wanted to give her an answer, a good one, but all he had were truths that wouldn't help. "I don't know," he said honestly. Mara nodded, as if she'd expected that, as if she'd stopped hoping for real answers a long time ago. Ember settled at her feet, her chin resting on the girl's ankle, one ear twitching whenever the wind moaned outside. She let out a quiet sigh, the kind that said, "I'm here, no matter what." Mara smiled faintly and reached down, brushing her fingers through the damp fur behind Ember's ears. The dog closed her eyes. "You're lucky," Mara whispered to Ember. "You got out." Caleb leaned back, watching the two of them like a scene from a dream he didn't know he'd been waiting for. The fire popped softly in the stove. The clock ticked. Outside, the world kept spinning. Inside, something finally stood still. "I can talk to someone," Caleb said after a while. "About you staying, about stopping all the moving." Mara looked up. Her eyes held no hope, just fatigue. "They always say that," she murmured. "Then they move me again anyway." He didn't argue, just nodded. But inside, a quiet vow was forming, like embers beneath ash, waiting for breath. The sky had cleared by morning, but the world still smelled like rain and pine needles. Mist clung low over the treetops behind the cabin, and the first pale beams of sun stretched across the floor like hesitant fingers. Mara sat on the rug in front of the wood stove, legs crossed, chin resting on her knees. The blanket had slipped from her shoulders, but she didn't seem to notice. Beside her, the dog lay curled in a patch of sunlight, scarred, silent, her breathing steady now, almost trusting. Caleb watched from the kitchen, a mug of coffee warming his hands. There was something sacred in the quiet, something he didn't want to disturb. "She needs a new name," Mara said softly, eyes still on the dog. Caleb raised an eyebrow. "She already has one, doesn't she? Shadow 9? Mara shook her head. "That's not a real name. That's what people called her when they made her do things." She looked at the dog, at the faint rise and fall of her ribs, the fresh bandages still clinging to her flank, the white scar that split her muzzle like a question no one had answered. She's not their thing anymore. Caleb came closer, sitting on the edge of the armchair. "All right," he said, voice gentle. "What do you want to call her?" Mara hesitated, then reached out to touch the dog's fur, damp still from last night's storm, but warm now in the firelight. "Ember," she said, "because even when fires die, they're still warm inside, still alive." Caleb didn't say anything for a long moment. He just looked at the two of them, one broken by people, one broken by life, and felt something stir inside his chest, like coals shifting in an old hearth. "Ember," he repeated. "That suits her." The dog didn't react right away. But then, as if some part of her understood the weight of the word, she lifted her head. Her eyes met Mara's, not cautious, not fearful, present. Mara smiled for the first time in days. Not wide, not carefree, but real. "She's not just surviving anymore," she whispered. "She's starting again." Caleb leaned back in the chair, his heart heavy with something he hadn't named in years. Grief, maybe, or hope, or both. "We all are," he said. And in the quiet that followed, the fire crackled softly. The girl leaned into the warmth of the dog, and the dog, Ember, closed her eyes, not from exhaustion, but peace. The morning passed in a hush of rustling papers, muffled keystrokes, and the occasional soft bark from Ember as she adjusted herself closer to the wood stove's warmth. Outside, wind swept through the bare trees, whispering down the chimney like the voice of a world that kept moving, even when you wished it would stand still. Caleb sat at the small kitchen table, shoulders slightly hunched, a yellow folder open in front of him. The title at the top read, "Application for Temporary Foster Guardianship, Emergency Intake." The rest was a blur of legal language, liability acknowledgments, and signature lines, each one heavy with implication. He took a slow breath. Then he picked up the pen. From the hallway, he heard Mara's soft giggle. Ember had nudged her gently in the ribs, pawing at the worn stuffed bear she kept tucked under one arm like a piece of herself. The kind of sound light and real that had been absent from the house for far too long. Caleb returned to the form. Previous experience with foster care? He paused, then wrote, "None. But I've pulled people from burning buildings. I learn fast. Why do you wish to foster this child?" He stared at the blinking cursor on his laptop for a long time before typing. "Because when I saw her in the dark, waving like the world was ending, something in me answered. Because she found light in a scarred dog. Because she asks nothing but offers trust anyway. Because no one should have to start over alone." He read it twice. Didn't change a word. His phone buzzed with an email reply from Mara's caseworker, Lydia Chen. The tone was polite, clinical. "We appreciate your interest, but foster placements must follow procedural review, including home checks, background verification, and compatibility interviews." Caleb replied anyway. No legalese, no careful clauses, just something simple, honest. "She's already part of this home. I'm not asking for a miracle. I'm just asking for the chance to prove what's already true." He hit send. Behind him, the floor creaked. "What you doing?" Mara asked, stepping into the room, oversized sweater sleeves dangling past her hands. Caleb turned with a small smile. "Filling out paperwork. Lots of boxes to check." "For me?" He nodded. "For both of you, really." She looked at the table where one of the forms fluttered under a draft. "Are they going to let me stay?" Caleb met her eyes, blue, solemn, too old for 7 years. He didn't offer hollow promises. He just said, I'll do everything I can. Mara didn't nod. She didn't smile. She just came forward, leaned against his arm, and stayed there a long moment, silent, steady. Behind them, Ember raised her head and watched, her ears flicking toward the sound of the wind, but her body calm, as if she, too, was learning to trust this place of new beginnings. Caleb put a hand on Mara's back, steady and warm. Some paperwork was ink on paper. Some promises were etched deeper into the quiet spaces where broken hearts tried, against all odds, to mend. The air was soft with the smell of warm cedar and something sweet. Maybe the apple cobbler Caleb had left cooling on the windowsill. Afternoon light slanted through the curtains in golden strips, catching dust motes like slow-falling snow. Mara was on the porch, crisscross applesauce, humming off-key as she braided a piece of yarn around Ember's collar, just for decoration, she'd said. Ember, patient as always, lay beside her with her chin resting on Mara's foot. Every so often, her tail thudded gently against the wooden floorboards. Then came the sound that cut through the peace like a razor, the low crunch of tires on gravel. Caleb looked up from the kitchen sink, instinct twitching. There was something off in the cadence of it. Not a neighbor, not a delivery. Too slow, too sure. A black SUV pulled into the drive, its windows tinted like secrets. Caleb wiped his hands and stepped outside, just as the driver's door flung open. A tall man got out, late 30s, hard lines around his mouth, eyes that didn't blink often enough. "Mara!" the man barked. "Get over here!" Mara froze. Her breath stopped. Her fingers went limp, the yarn unraveling. Then she whispered, barely audible, "Trent?" Caleb moved instantly, stepping in front of her. "Can I help you?" The man's lip curled. "She's my family. I'm taking her back. She's under state care. If you have concerns, speak with CPS, but you don't barge onto private property and start shouting at a child." Trent's eyes flicked to Caleb with thinly veiled disdain. "I don't need permission to take what's mine." Behind Caleb, Ember rose to her feet with the slow, measured grace of something ancient and coiled. Her hackles lifted. Her stance shifted. Not aggressive, but immovable. She stepped between Mara and the man and let out a low, visceral growl. Trent halted. The sound wasn't loud, but it didn't have to be. It was the kind of sound that spoke of warning buried deep in bone, a warning learned in fire, forged in violence, and held back only by the girl clinging silently behind her. "Call her off," Trent snapped. "No," Caleb said. For a moment the wind held its breath. Mara's face had drained of color. Her hands trembled at her sides. "He's not my family," she whispered, so soft Caleb almost missed it. "He hurt my mom. He used to hit the dog before Ember." Caleb's jaw tightened. Trent's smile returned, cold and wrong. "Kids say all kinds of things when they're confused." Ember's growl deepened. "Leave," Caleb said firmly. "Now." "And if I don't?" Caleb didn't raise his voice. He just took a single step forward. "Then I call the sheriff. And you'll have to explain to him why a man with a domestic violence record is trespassing on a foster home without cause." That landed. Trent's eyes narrowed, but he turned slowly and returned to the SUV. Before he slammed the door, he looked at Mara. "You'll be sorry, girl." The SUV backed out in a spray of gravel and vanished down the road. Silence returned like a blanket thrown over broken glass. Caleb turned. Mara hadn't moved. Her lips were pressed into a thin line, her chest rising and falling too fast. Ember licked her hand, nudged her, let out a low whine. And finally, Mara sank to her knees and buried her face into Ember's side. "I don't want to go with him," she whispered. "Ever. Please." "You're not going anywhere," Caleb said softly, crouching beside her. "Not with him. Not with anyone who makes you feel small." The wind picked up again, this time without menace. Ember leaned into the girl as if to say, "You are not alone. Not anymore." And for the first time since the SUV had appeared, Mara exhaled. The afternoon had begun to cool, the wind sharpening slightly as if it too sensed what was coming. Caleb had stepped inside only briefly to retrieve his phone and call the sheriff. He never should have left the porch. Outside, Mara stood frozen on the steps, her eyes locked on the man now walking toward her like he owned the air she breathed. "Come here, Mara," Trent said again, this time low, like a threat wrapped in molasses. "Don't make me say it twice." Mara took a step back. Ember rose without hesitation. She didn't bark. She didn't lunge. She simply moved into position between Mara and the man, muscles coiled like steel cables under fur. Her head was low, her ears pinned, her eyes locked. And then came the sound. A growl, not loud but guttural. It didn't come from her throat, it came from somewhere older. Trent stopped short. "You're letting that thing decide for you now?" he spat. "She's just a dumb mutt, tamed by treats and tricks." He took another step. Ember stayed put. He reached out, fast, too fast, and Mara flinched. And that's when Ember bared her teeth, not showy, not exaggerated, just enough to make every instinct in Trent's body remember something it had long forgotten. Fear. "You're going to regret that," he snapped, shoving his hand at her as if she were a fly to be swatted. And that's when she moved. Not up, not down, just forward precise, like a scalpel. Her jaws snapped around the cuff of his jeans, clamping down with measured force, not to tear flesh, not to maim, just to hold. Just to say, "One more inch and I won't miss." "Let go of me," Trent bellowed, yanking his leg. Ember didn't budge. She held on with a grip that wasn't violent, but wasn't going to be ignored either. "Get your beast off me," he yelled, panic rising like bile. "Ember!" Caleb's voice rang out from the door, calm but commanding. She released. Trent stumbled back, nearly losing his balance, one hand grabbing the porch railing, the other hovering like a shield between him and the dog. "She's a menace," he shouted, spit flying. "She just attacked me." "No," Caleb replied, stepping outside slowly. "She warned you, and you ignored her. That's on you. I'll have her put down for this." Caleb's jaw locked. "You try that, and I promise there'll be a dozen witnesses, including me, who will testify that she protected a child from being grabbed without consent. You want to explain that to a courtroom?" Trent's face twisted, but he didn't answer. He turned, pant leg dirtied and chewed, and stomped back to the SUV. Mara's voice was barely a breath. "She protected me, even when I couldn't move." Caleb knelt beside her. "Because she sees you, the real you." Ember licked Mara's hand once, and then sat tall, unmoving, watching the SUV disappear. Inside her chest, her heart thudded with quiet fury. No one would touch the girl again, not without going through her first. The SUV's tail lights vanished down the gravel road, throwing dust into the dusk. Caleb stood still for a moment, phone in hand, before finally pressing the call button. 911, what's your emergency? He inhaled. This is Caleb Merrick. A man named Trent Vale just attempted to forcibly take a child from my property. There was an altercation involving a protective canine. He fled the scene in a black SUV. The dispatcher's tone sharpened. Is the child safe? She is, shaken, but safe. The dog intervened before he could touch her. Officers are en route. Caleb looked down at Mara. Her shoulders were trembling, but her face was blank, the kind of blank that meant too much was happening inside for any of it to show. Ember remained pressed against her leg, steady as stone. By the time the cruisers pulled into the driveway, blue lights strobing silently against the pine trees, Mara hadn't said a word. 2 officers stepped out, followed closely by a woman in a long gray coat. Mara's caseworker, Dana Lee. She moved quickly, eyes scanning the scene, then knelt in front of the girl. Did he hurt you, Mara? Dana's voice was soft, urgent. Mara shook her head. He tried to, but Ember stopped him. Dana's eyes flicked to the German shepherd, sitting like a sentinel. Good girl, she murmured. Inside, the conversation turned legal. He wasn't on any official visitor list, Caleb said, pacing. He just showed up and started yelling, tried to grab her. One of the officers flipped through a tablet. Name's Trent Vale. We've got Pryor's restraining orders in another county. Assault, CPS flags. He was removed from Mara's life 2 years ago. Dana nodded grimly. I'm submitting an emergency protective hold. This will fast-track the foster evaluation for Mara. She shouldn't be moved again, Caleb said quietly. She won't be, Dana replied. Not if I can help it. The other officer came from outside. No sign of him yet, but we've got his plates and vehicle make. We'll find him. Mara hadn't left Ember's side. Her small fingers twisted in the dog's scruff, not tugging, just holding. Ember leaned her head gently into Mara's lap, calm and unflinching. Dana noticed. She's more than comfort, she said to Caleb, her voice low. She's an anchor. We've seen cases where animals are considered therapeutic, but this is something deeper. Ember's officially going in Mara's file, as a protective factor. Caleb blinked. Is that legal? Dana gave a thin smile. It is now. Later, after the police had gone and Dana had finished her report, Mara sat on the porch wrapped in one of Caleb's flannel shirts. Ember dozed at her feet. You think he'll come back? Mara whispered. Caleb looked out into the night. If he does, he won't get past either of us. Mara glanced down. Ember's eyes were closed, but her ears twitched at every noise. I don't think he'll get past her either. The training yard was quiet, morning mist clinging low over the field like breath held too long. Caleb stood at the edge, hands deep in his jacket pockets, watching through the chain-link fence. Inside, Ember paced beside Officer Reyes, her gait steady but cautious. Mara wasn't here. The department insisted no emotional interference. This was Ember's evaluation, her final test. Sit, Reyes commanded. Ember hesitated, then lowered herself slowly. Not graceful, but obedient. Caleb exhaled behind the fence, heart caught in the quiet bravery of it. They moved through drills, noise tolerance, stranger approach, reaction under stress. A dropped metal bowl clanged hard against concrete. Ember flinched but didn't flee. When a man in sunglasses approached aggressively, Ember stepped forward once, then held position guarded, but in control. That's a pass, Reyes murmured, checking his clipboard. The last test was simple. A blanket laid out, a child's doll in the center. Ember approached, sniffed, then curled into a quiet sphinx beside it, her eyes sharp, watching, waiting. "She remembers," Caleb whispered. "She remembers what matters." When they finally opened the gate, Caleb knelt. Ember pressed her head into his palm. "She passed," Reyes said. "She can stay. No more shelters, no more holding periods, just one word home." As they walked back across the gravel lot, Caleb whispered, "Let's go home, girl." And for the first time in a long time, Ember's tail moved. The courthouse echoed with the cold sounds of process. Shoes on tile, voices like murmurs behind glass. But at the center of it all stood Mara, one hand gripping Ember's leash like it was the only thing keeping her grounded. "You okay?" Caleb asked. Mara gave the smallest nod, her bangs hiding her eyes. Ember stood pressed against her side, alert. Inside, the courtroom felt far too large. Officials shuffled papers. Testimonies began. But it wasn't the legal language that mattered. It was Mara's truth. "She's my family," Mara said softly when asked about Ember. "She saved me." Caleb testified, too, about bedtime routines, laughter returning, meals without hiding scraps. But his voice steadied when he said, "Ember's been the constant, the thing that doesn't leave." Then came the question, would Mara like to speak? She rose slowly. Ember followed, step for step. "I know what it feels like to be passed around," she said. "To keep your shoes on at night because you might be moved again. But here Ember and Caleb, they didn't make me feel broken. This is my home." No one spoke when she finished. They didn't have to. Later, in the hallway outside the courtroom, everything felt suspended in white light and waiting. Mara sat curled on a bench, Ember's head resting in her lap like an anchor. Her hand moved through the dog's fur in slow, silent loops. Caleb paced nearby, jaw clenched, one hand running through his hair. She hadn't spoken since her testimony. But the weight of it all hung over her like fog. Her silence screamed the word she didn't want to say. "I'm tired of being on hold, of being a file, a maybe." A clock ticked. Lawyers passed. A door opened, shut. Still, no word. Then, barely audible, Mara sniffled. Caleb stopped pacing. "She's warm," Mara said quietly, her voice fraying. "Even when everything else feels cold." Caleb crouched beside her. "She's good at that." "I don't want to go back," Mara whispered. "They say it's just temporary, but it never is. It's always again." Her voice cracked, and Ember responded instantly, nudging into her side, breathing out a sigh of quiet solidarity. "I told them," Mara said, stroking Ember's cheek, "that you're my people." Caleb didn't rush to promise what he couldn't yet guarantee. But he said, "Whatever happens next, you're not alone in it." "Do you think they believed me?" He nodded. "I think they saw you, and that makes all the difference." Tears slipped from her cheeks, soaking into Ember's fur. Still, the dog didn't move. She simply lay there, her own form of testimony. Mara looked up. "Will they let me stay?" "They'll do what's right," Caleb said, then added more softly, "And if they don't, we'll fight. I promise." "She picked me, you know," Mara whispered. "From the beginning." "I know," Caleb said. "I saw it." They sat together in the silence, not waiting for permission to be a family, but holding on to the truth that they already were. The smell of warm butter and sugar drifted through the old house like a memory coming home. Mara stood on a step stool beside the kitchen counter, sleeves rolled up, cheeks dusted with flour. She stirred cookie dough with a spoon almost too big for her hands. "You sure you didn't sneak any chocolate chips?" Caleb asked, raising an eyebrow. Mara grinned. "Maybe just 5. He leaned in, mock serious. "Should I count your teeth?" Her giggle filled the room pure and unguarded. Ember, the German shepherd lying by the doorway, lifted her head. Mara tossed her a tiny bit of dough, not enough to spoil dinner, just enough to say, "You belong here too." Later, after the cookies baked and the popcorn bowl was nearly empty, Mara asked softly, "Can Ember sleep in my room?" Caleb looked at the dog, who perked up at her name. "I think she already decided that's her spot." Mara returned with her favorite blue blanket and laid it beside her bed. Ember circled once, then curled up with a contented sigh. "You're safe now," Mara whispered, pressing her forehead gently to the dog's. That night, as Ember slept beside her and Caleb stood in the doorway, Mara called out, "Do you think they'll let me stay for good?" He paused. "I think they'll see what's already true." "What's that?" "That this is your home now, and we're not just pretending." She didn't answer right away, just let her breathing slow until Ember's rose and fell in sync with hers. Caleb didn't shut the door all the way, just enough to let the light leak through. Enough to say, "No more locked doors." The next day, Mara walked faster through the school hallway, crumpled note in hand, feeling the sting of whispers behind her. "She lives with that fireman, right? And some mutt. Like a charity case." She didn't cry. Not yet. The bus dropped her at the gravel road. At home, the door creaked open before she touched it. Ember barked once alert, sensing something off. Mara dropped her bag and sat silently on the porch. Caleb emerged from the kitchen. "You're home early." He saw her hunched shoulders and sat beside her. "Not too close." "They said I was weird," she mumbled. "That I live in a garage with a mutt." Caleb nodded slowly. "Well, you do live with a fireman, and a mutt who's better than most people I know." Ember nudged her knee, then lay beside her like a silent shield. "I told them I didn't care," Mara said, "but I do." "It's okay to care," Caleb replied gently, "even about stupid things." She looked at him with red-rimmed eyes. "They looked at me like I'm broken. They see pieces, but they don't know the whole story." After a long pause, she whispered, "What if I don't fit in anywhere?" "Fitting in's overrated," he said. "But feeling safe, that's what matters. That's what we're building here." Mara leaned into Ember, fingers tangled in fur. "Can I just stay here?" "You already are," Caleb said, "and we'll keep showing up for you. Me and Ember both." It was Community Helpers Day at school. Caleb hesitated when Mara asked him to speak, but her quiet voice, "Maybe Ember can come too, so I don't feel alone," settled it. So they came, a firefighter in a navy shirt, a quiet girl clutching a notebook, and a German shepherd who moved like a shadow at Caleb's side. Inside the multi-purpose room, second graders squirmed on the floor. Mara sat on the edge. Ember lay curled beside her, alert but calm. Caleb talked about fire safety and let kids try on his helmet. Some classmates stared, curious, others still skeptical. But Ember's presence was like armor. After the talk, The principal offered a tour of the new wing. As they walked past freshly painted murals, a piercing alarm shattered the calm. Fire alarm. Children screamed. Teachers scrambled. Chaos. Mara flinched, covering her ears. Ember jumped to her feet before Caleb could react, her body coiled, eyes scanning exits and corners. No panic, just focus. Training. "Stay by the wall," Caleb called, guiding kids. Ember moved with surgical purpose, nudging a frozen boy forward, circling a panicked girl, clearing a path. She stayed just ahead, checking over her shoulder to make sure Mara was there. Out on the blacktop, Ember guided Mara to safety, then sat beside her, still trembling with readiness. Caleb knelt by her, brushing her scarred muzzle. "Good girl." The principal rushed over. "False alarm. Kitchen toaster. But that dog, she cleared half the hallway faster than my staff." "Old habits," Caleb murmured. Mara wrapped her arms around Ember's neck, pride shining through the fear. Ember leaned into the hug, finally letting out a breath. Back inside, Caleb couldn't shake the image of Ember transforming panic into order, not as a discarded police K-9, but as a guardian whose mission was now this one girl. Later, while kids licked popsicles and the nurse checked pulses, Caleb sat beside Mara outside the office. "She's amazing," Mara whispered. "So are you," Caleb replied. "You didn't freeze. You followed her. She just knew." He nodded. "She may never wear a badge again, but she doesn't need one. Her job now is you. And maybe, if you're okay with it, helping other kids feel safe too." Mara smiled, a real unguarded smile. "I think she'd like that, if I'm with her." From a doorway, students stared, but the whispers felt smaller now. They'd seen something undeniable. A scarred shepherd turned fear into safety. A quiet girl who stood taller because of her. Caleb looked at them, girl and dog side by side, and something settled in his chest. Mara hadn't just found a pet. She'd found her protector. And Ember, once deemed too broken for service, had found her most important mission yet. The final bell rang. Mara rose, leash in hand. Ember matched her step. "Ready to go home?" Caleb asked. She gave Ember a pat and said softly, "Our home." And as they walked through the school doors, sunlight spilled across the hallway floor like a promise. This is where new beginnings start, one act of loyalty at a time. The letter came in a box Nora hadn't opened in years. It was buried beneath an old fleece jacket that still smelled faintly like him. She unfolded the envelope with trembling hands. His handwriting. Her name. "Nora, if you're reading this, I didn't make it home, but don't let this break you. Grief is a house with no windows, but it's not where you have to live. Find joy again, even if it's borrowed. Especially then. I'll wait for you in whatever comes next." The ache in her chest returned, not from pain, but from the weight of love and sorrow coexisting. At her feet, Milo stirred and moved closer, resting his chin on her knee. Quiet, present, like he used to be. It hit her then. She had found joy again in Ellie's laughter, in muddy paw prints and toys underfoot, in sleeping through the night. In Milo, the dog who'd come to them broken, now whole. "You were never just a dog, were you?" she whispered. "You were the bridge." That evening, Ellie danced barefoot across the yard, wearing a paper crown. At the edge, halfway between earth and heaven, lay Milo. He watched every move she made, not out of duty, but love. The scars on his body hadn't vanished, but they no longer defined him. They were simply part of the story. When Ellie stumbled, he stood, ready, but she laughed and waved her scepter. "Sir Milo, you may rest now, guardian of the realm." He wagged once, slow and solemn, and lay back down. On the porch, Nora sipped tea beside the folded letter. Ellie curled beside Milo without a word. From the street, the house looked ordinary, but anyone who really looked might notice. The porch was a watchtower, and the dog upon it a quiet sentinel of something healed. The next day, Ellie painted a wooden sign with teal strokes. "Milo didn't need saving, we did." They hung it above the door, where the morning sun would find it every day. That night, with cocoa and mint tea in hand, Ellie asked, "Do you think people will understand?" Nora smiled. "The ones who matter already do." And when Ellie asked if her dad would be proud, Nora whispered, "I think he's smiling right now." Weeks later, Sunday dawned with fog and the scent of pine. Caleb unfolded the local gazette and froze. Disgraced K9 becomes hero again, a photo of Ember. Mara half hidden behind her. The article described how Ember had stopped Trent Vale from abducting the girl. Mara read every word aloud, then looked up. "That's us." "Disgraced," she repeated. "That sounds bad." "It just means hurt," Caleb replied. "But the second part says it all. Becomes hero again." She clipped the article for her journal, pasting it beside a pine needle, a hospital sticker, a Polaroid. Now it can't disappear. Ember rested her head on the journal, sealing it with presence. Caleb's phone buzzed. Lydia Chen. "This public recognition will help at next week's placement review." Mara wrote beneath the headline, "Every ember can start a new fire." "Do you think that's true?" she asked. "I know it is," Caleb said. "You're living proof." Later that week, a manila envelope arrived, CPS seal stamped in blue. Inside, "Effective immediately, Mara Faye Linden may remain in the Merrick residence under permanent foster care. Adoption eligibility in 60 days. When Caleb read it aloud, Mara bolted from her chair and threw her arms around him. "They're not taking me away?" "You're home," he whispered. They marked the calendar. Maybe Adoption Day, circled in red. Ember licked away tears. Caleb brewed cocoa, milk with honey, and coffee. 3 mugs clinked. A family unlikely, but true. On a clear autumn afternoon, they drove to the roadside where it all began. The same leaning guardrail, the same pine that had sheltered them from winter and fear. But now, Mara held packets of wildflower seeds. "They bloom even when no one takes care of them," she said, digging gently. "So no other kid feels forgotten here." They planted together, quiet and reverent. Caleb placed a carved stone by the tree. Here grew hope. 4 Feb, first winter night. Here grows family. May, planting day. As needles drifted like confetti, Mara pressed her forehead to Ember's fur. Caleb thought. He'd seen courage in fires, but nothing like this. "See you in the spring," Mara whispered to the soil. They returned to the truck. As the road unfurled before them, Ember laid her head in Mara's lap, and wildflower seeds clung to their sleeves. Caleb watched the forest blur past and thought, hope isn't just planted. Sometimes it plants you. And if you're lucky, it keeps growing long after the road behind you disappears. The county courthouse looked different in late spring, no longer an austere block of marble, but a building softened by climbing wisteria and morning sun. A handful of petals fluttered across the steps as Caleb, Mara, and Ember climbed toward the double doors that would make everything official. Ember trotted proudly at Mara's side, her black and tan coat glossy under a fresh brushing, a wide crimson ribbon tied in a neat bow around her neck. The ribbon had been Mara's idea, so everyone knows she's part of the celebration. The dog didn't seem to mind the pageantry. She held her head high, tail sweeping in slow, assured arcs. Inside, security guards smiled as they waved the trio through the metal detector. One bent to scratch Ember's chin. "Big day, huh, girl?" Ember answered with a soft whuff before resuming her post at Mara's knee. On the second floor, Courtroom 3A had been transformed from its usual wood-paneled severity into something intimate. The bailiff had tucked away the witness box, leaving only a single oak table in front of the bench. A vase of daisies sat beside a leather-bound ledger titled Adoptions, Permanent Orders. Judge Hartley entered without a robe, just a gray suit and a kind smile. "Shall we begin?" he asked, voice gentle, as if he were officiating a garden wedding rather than a legal proceeding. Caleb and Mara stood before the bench. Ember settled in a sphinx position at Mara's feet. The child wore a pale yellow dress she'd chosen herself, and her braids were tied with matching ribbons. She kept one hand on Ember's shoulder, anchoring herself to the steady rise and fall of canine breath. The judge glanced at the file. Petitioner Caleb Merrick, seeking finalization of adoption for minor Mara Faye Linden. He looked up, eyes warm. "And Miss Mara, I see you've requested a change of surname?" Mara straightened. "Yes, Your Honor. I want to be Mara Shore." The name floated in the stillness shore, the promise of safe land after deep water. Caleb's throat tightened. Judge Hartley nodded. "Very well. Mr. Merrick, you prepared a statement?" Caleb unfolded a single sheet, hands trembling slightly despite weeks of rehearsing. Ember tilted her head, sensing the shift in his breathing. "My promise," he began, voice already catching. He cleared his throat and tried again. "Mara, from the night you waved me down on that dark road, you've shown more courage than most people muster in a lifetime. You and Ember taught me that family isn't found, it's forged. Today I vow to stand in every gap this world ever leaves around you, to listen when words are hard, to fight when you can't, and to celebrate every wildflower you plant along the way." His eyes blurred. The page wavered. He lowered it, unable to read the rest. That's my oath." Silence, thick with held breaths. Mara's lip quivered, but her gaze never wavered from his. Ember pressed a paw onto his shoe as if lending him her steadiness. Judge Hartley cleared his throat softly. "Thank you, Mr. Merrick." He turned to Mara. "Do you accept this promise?" She nodded hard. "Yes, sir." "And do you promise to keep reminding him about wildflowers when he forgets to slow down?" A small laugh rippled through the room. Social worker, clerk, even the bailiff by the door. Mara smiled, eyes shining. "I promise." "Excellent." The judge signed 3 swift strokes in the ledger, then handed the pen to Mara. "Your turn right beneath mine." Mara leaned over the book. Her hand shook for a heartbeat, then steadied. In careful loops she wrote, "Mara Faye Shore." When she lifted the pen, a tear splashed onto the fresh ink, blooming it slightly like watercolor. Ember nudged her elbow, and Mara giggled, dabbing the page gently with a tissue. Judge Hartley set down his pen. "By the authority vested in me by the state of Colorado, I declare this adoption finalized. Congratulations, family." He reached over the bench to shake Caleb's hand, then, with less formality, scratched Ember behind the ears. "And congratulations to you, Officer Ember retired. The room erupted in small applause. Caleb exhaled a breath he'd been holding for months and pulled Mara into his arms. She buried her face against his chest, shoulders shaking with joyful sobs. Ember barked a bright, ringing note that bounced off the courtroom walls like a celebratory bell, then spun once, tail wagging wildly. Dana, the social worker, snapped a photo. A firefighter with tears in his eyes, a girl clutching adoption papers, and a scarred shepherd wearing a red ribbon, all framed by dusty shafts of morning light. As they stepped into the hallway, Mara clutching her new birth certificate copy, Caleb leaned down. "Ready to go home, Miss Shore?" She grinned. "Let's take the long way. I want to see if the wildflowers are growing yet." Ember trotted ahead, leading them toward the doors that opened onto bright sun and the rest of their lives, each step a testament to promises kept, names reclaimed, and the ember of one winter night fanned into a family's enduring flame. Station 7 sat at the edge of town like an old red-brick Guardian garage doors rolled up in warm weather, the faint aroma of diesel and dish soap drifting onto the street. On this bright Saturday the bay gleamed. Rigs were polished, chrome mirrors flashing sunbeams at passing cars. Word had spread that Caleb was bringing his girls for an official introduction, and the crew had gone all in. Mara's eyes widened as the pickup eased into the lot. A ladder truck towered beside a squat rescue engine. Hoses hung in neat coils. Turnout coats lined the walls like giant empty shells. Caleb killed the ignition and glanced back. "Ready for the grand tour, Miss Shore?" She nodded, clutching Ember's leash. The shepherd hopped to the pavement with practiced caution, red Adoption Day ribbon still tied neatly at her collar. The bay door closest to them slid open. Captain Ortiz, broad-shouldered, mustache, bristling, waved. "About time you paraded that family of yours." Inside, the crew formed a ragged semicircle. Firefighters Biggs and Tron in Navy shirts, EMT Jackson balancing a tray of cupcakes, Rookie Diaz clutching a small velvet box. The air smelled of coffee, engine oil, and something sugary. Caleb guided Mara forward. She kept one hand in Ember's fur, the other fidgeting with the hem of her T-shirt. Ember matched her step for step, scanning faces but relaxed. Someone had clearly spread the "no sudden movements" memo. Ortiz knelt to Mara's height. "We've heard a lot about you, especially how you kept our boy Caleb on his toes. Think it's only fair we make you one of us." He nodded to Diaz, who opened the velvet box. Inside lay a gleaming miniature badge, polished to mirror finish. The inscription read, "Honorary Rescuer, Station 7. Mara's breath caught. "For me?" "All yours," Ortiz said, pinning it carefully to her shirt pocket. "Means you helped save a life, maybe two, 'cause you saved that dog, and that dog saved you, and together you saved Caleb from being lonely as a stump. That's some record." Laughter rippled through the bay. Caleb's cheeks reddened, but his smile was unabashed. Jackson stepped forward with the cupcakes frosted in fire engine red and piped with tiny yellow flames. Ember's ears perked, but she stayed seated, nose twitching. Tran produced a stainless steel bowl with a single pupcake, sugar-free peanut butter swirl. When Ember received it, she glanced at Mara as if seeking permission. The girl nodded, grin stretching ear to ear. Then Biggs disappeared behind the rescue rig and returned holding a small brown vest. Stitched across the back in gold thread, "Emotional Support. Retired K-9, Ember." He knelt, buckling the vest with slow, practiced hands. Ember seemed to stand taller once it settled on her shoulders, as if the fabric acknowledged something she'd always known. that her job was no longer detection or bite work, but steady companionship and quiet courage. Caleb cleared his throat, voice thick. "Cap, crew, thank you. You didn't have to." "Shut up," Ortiz said gruffly, then softened. "Family's family." He clapped Caleb's shoulder, then offered Mara a tour. She followed, eyes shining beneath the brim of a spare station cap Diaz placed on her head. They tried on air masks, tested the PA system, Mara's giggle echoed through the bay speakers, and raised the ladder halfway so she could peek at the town's rooftops. Ember padded beside her, vest catching the light, tail sweeping in measured arcs. For once, Mara wasn't the foster kid or the girl with the dog. She was part of something bigger, an engine company's heartbeat, a chain of watchful guardians. As the visit wound down, Ortiz called for a group photo. Firefighters in turnout pants, Mara at center clutching her new badge, Ember seated proudly at her side, Caleb crouched behind them both. The shutter clicked, capturing soot-stained boots and cupcake crumbs, red ribbon and golden fur, mismatched family forged in heat and heart. Hours later, driving home, Mara traced the badge pinned to her chest. "Do you really think I helped save lives?" Caleb glanced over, smile soft. "Every single day, starting with your own. That's the bravest rescue I know." From the passenger seat, Amber let out a contented chuff, as if agreeing that heroism sometimes begins with surviving and then choosing to live out loud. And in the fading afternoon, the badge glinted once bright as a spark catching tinder before settling against Mara's heart, exactly where it belonged. The hush of evening settled over the cabin like a soft quilt. Outside, pine branches swayed against a backdrop of velvet night, pushing stray moonbeams across the bedroom walls in slow, glimmering waves. The window was cracked just enough to let in the scent of damp soil and distant lilac first blossoms nudged open by spring warmth. Mara slipped from the bathroom in flannel pajamas patterned with tiny firefighting helmets, Ortiz's gag gift, now her favorite attire. She padded across the wooden floor and paused at her bedside table where the blue journal lay open. Tucked inside were the wildflower seed envelopes, the newspaper clipping, and a freshly pressed daisy from the courthouse steps. She smoothed a corner, then closed the book, content to let memories rest for the night. Ember had already made herself comfortable, circling once on the star-spangled blanket that permanently lived at the foot of the bed. Her new vest hung on a peg near the door, but the red ribbon still adorned her collar, slightly frayed at the edges, yet vibrant as ever. When Mara climbed under the quilt, the shepherd lifted her head, amber eyes catching moonlight. "Move over, Cuddlebug," Mara whispered, scooting to grant space. Ember obeyed, elegant even in drowsiness, until her side pressed gently against the girl's hip. The weight was soothing, equal parts protector and plush toy. Mara laid one hand on the dog's ribs, feeling the steady rhythm beneath her fingertips. Across the hall, Caleb finished washing the last dinner dish. The hum of the faucet stopped. Footfalls padded toward Mara's doorway. He poked his head in, hair damp from a quick shower, a sleepy grin playing at the corners of his mouth. "How's my honorary rescuer?" he asked. "Tired," Mara admitted, but the word felt cozy rather than weary. Today was big. Big in the best way. He leaned against the doorframe. "Need anything? Nightlight still good?" She glanced at the windowsill where a small battery lamp shaped like a campfire cast flickering amber. "Perfect." Caleb nodded, gaze drifting to Ember. "Looks like you've got security covered." Mara smiled. "Always." A pause, softer. "Thank you for everything." Caleb's throat tightened, but he kept his tone light. "Sleep well, Mara Shore." She returned the full name address with a sleepy wave. Caleb closed the door until it clicked, leaving a sliver open by habit, a silent promise that no door in this house would ever shut her out again. Inside the gentle gloom, Mara turned onto her side, nose inches from Ember's ears. "Remember when we were scared of the dark?" she murmured. Ember's tail gave a single, subdued thump. Mara gazed at the ceiling where a scattering of glow-in-the-dark stars still clung, a relic of a previous kid who'd once called this room theirs. But tonight, real constellations outshone plastic phosphor. Through the uncovered window pane, a river of starlight spilled across the quilt, bright and unbroken. She traced a few with her eyes: Orion's belt, the North Star. That little faint smear Caleb had taught her was the Pleiades. Somewhere beyond those lights lay places she might never see, yet the vastness no longer frightened her. It felt like an invitation whispered through time. The cabin's floorboards creaked in their usual settling rhythm. Outside, an owl hooted a lone note, then silence. Ember's breathing slowed, syncing with Mara's, until they inhaled and exhaled as one living metronome. The girl's eyelids fluttered, heavy, but she fought to keep them open for another lingering moment. Because if you blink too soon, she thought, you might miss how perfect everything finally feels. She pictured the wildflower bed sprouting by the roadside, envisioned petals nodding under the same starlight, waiting for morning to unfold. Tomorrow, she'd show Caleb her new journal entry. You can plant hope anywhere, if you decide to stay long enough to watch it grow. He would grin that quiet grin, Ember would sneeze her agreement, and life would keep rolling forward messy, miraculous. Mara's fingers twined deeper into Ember's fur. "Good night," she breathed, but it sounded like a vow gentle and enduring. The dog shifted just enough to press her muzzle against the girl's chest, releasing a sigh so content it seemed to carry every fear they'd once shared out through the cracked window into the night air. No longer a forgotten child, no longer a discarded dog, just family, wrapped in starlight and promise, held steady by the pulse of one home and the quiet assurance that tomorrow and every tomorrow after would find them together. Mara's eyes finally drifted closed, and for the first time in either of their memories, darkness meant only rest. In the end, Mara, Ember, and Caleb remind us that compassion can rewrite even the harshest histories. German shepherds, often lauded for their strength, also embody gentleness, loyalty, and a profound instinct to heal the humans who stand beside them. When given a second chance, a discarded K9 became the steady heartbeat of a new family, proving that animals are not commodities to be used and tossed away, but sentient partners who feel, remember, and protect. Their journey urges us to look twice at every shelter kennel and roadside shadow. The next hero may be waiting there, searching for a hand to trust. It urges us to listen to children's quiet courage, to honor the power of found families, and to believe that wounds visible or hidden can knit themselves into something stronger than before. Plant wildflowers where despair once lived. Tie red ribbons on old scars. Celebrate each small victory, whether it's a first laugh in months or a tail thumping in newfound safety. When we choose empathy over indifference, we don't just rescue animals. We rescue the most hopeful parts of ourselves.